You're always going to do that to an extent, but you don't want to cut off potential avenues of research because you might be doing yourself a disservice in terms of the kind of essay you could have written. So obviously here's the bad news, which is that if you've already read the novel and you haven't done this, you're up shit creek without a paddle, because you've already decided what the text is about, and your notes might be awful, because your notes might have excluded vast swaths of the novel already. So really, I should be doing this at the start of the course, sorry, and telling everyone to get rid of their ego at the start of the course. But hopefully you're not going to write a research essay on a novel without at least skimming over it again. So this starts at the most basic level. Before you even take notes, take marginalia. So write stuff down in the margins and use your highlighter as much as possible. So create marginalia, comment on things, Huxley, you're full of shit, and highlight stuff. This section is weird. So that's what we're going for. We're going for moments from the text or themes in the text that stand out in some way. You don't need to know why they stand out or what they mean, okay? You just need to try and use your intuition. This is an advanced course, so hopefully everyone's read quite a lot of stuff by now. Use your intuition to work out that the text finds a particular moment, something a character says, an event in the narrative, a way a particular scene is described, a theme or a concept, a reference to another piece of literature or some political event or an historical event, something like that. If the text finds it important, if you think it's important, highlight it, and it doesn't matter what it is. You know, if you always write an essay on feminism or something, don't just highlight the feminism stuff. Partially because you'll probably write a shitty essay on feminism if you do that. So, highlight everything that the novel finds important. So let's talk about this with some specifics again. If you're doing Brave New World, it's pretty obvious that text is satirizing communism, but also having a go at some of the worst excesses of industrial capitalism. So, you know, assembly line industrialization, because it critiques Henry Ford. And the text is also obviously having a go at eugenics, the dangers of genetic manipulation, ideological indoctrination, and all that. The problem with that is that it allows us to overread certain characters. So in a previous lecture I talked quite a lot about how I think Lenina is not as simple as she appears to be. So on the surface, Lenina appears to be a victim of ideological indoctrination. You know, she's totally superficial, all she wants to do is have sex with John. I argue that that's not in fact true, that the ideological manipulation has been mostly successful, but in fact there's this like burgeoning independence inside Lenina trying to get out, in much the same way as it is with some of the other characters. But if you don't highlight everything, or if you only highlight things that you have an explanation for, you'll almost certainly miss that aspect of Lenina's character. So remember, we're trying to build up to a place where you can write an essay here. We're not writing the essay, we're trying to get to that stage. But hopefully you can see that if you don't do this right, you're always going to write the same sort of essay. And in fact, you're always going to write an essay that's underwhelming compared to the kind of thing you could do. You're only going to notice what you are already trained to notice. You're only going to notice the stuff that you're ideologically programmed to notice. And you're probably never going to make any progress. So highlight everything important. Now what you want to do, we're still in the novel here, right? We've got our book and we're just writing in it. Now what you want to do is take these notes down onto paper. And this is the first stage of aggregating your evidence rather than just collecting it. So from this very first moment of beginning to write the essay formally, to actually submitting it all the way through at the end of stage 4 is a process of gradually synthesizing information, gradually reducing the amount of stuff you have to talk about. And this is the first stage. And that means it's really important, because what you throw away here, you're probably never going to get back. You know, when you're stressed and you're in the middle of writing the essay, you're not going to go back to your original highlights and marginalia and go, oh yeah, I think I should include this thing after all. You're never going to do that. So this first stage of synthesis is super important. Two exclamation marks, because it's important. When you take notes, you have to start to think about what is most important about the text. So here is where you start to prioritize your evidence. What you throw away in an essay and what you choose to include might be the single most important set of choices you make that determine the success of your essay. Everyone thinks, oh, I'm too dumb to get an A+, or oh, I'm so smart, I'm going to get an A+. No. Your capacity to get an A or an A+ starts to be determined heavily at this stage. And if you're always getting A's or A+s and think, I never do this, maybe your professors are taking it too easy on you, but probably you already do this without realizing it. You're just doing it in your head. People with large working memories tend to be able to do this very well without needing to break it down into taking notes. But there's a problem, which is if you ever go on to graduate or professional school and you have to do really big projects, you're going to overwhelm the size even of your genius working memory, and then you're going to be up shit creek, because you're not going to have trained these skills formally. You'll only ever have deployed them informally, instinctually, from inside your own head. So now's a great opportunity to start to formalize these procedures. So if you ever do an honours thesis or a master's thesis, or you become a lawyer and you have to manage a lot more information, you're going to need formal strategies to do it. All right, so how do we prioritize evidence? How do we get from this stage of talking about everything the novel finds important to stuff you could potentially write about? There are a few ways to do it. Here's where you might want to reintroduce that pesky question sheet the professor has given you. Obviously, it's unlikely, unless you are extremely good, that you're going to think of something to write about on the novel, on the course, that the professor hasn't covered in some way on the question sheet. If you think you have found something that the lecturer never mentioned in a lecture and never mentioned on the question sheet, you're either extremely good or nowhere near as good as you think you are. And don't take the risk that it's the second one. So now you might want to reintroduce the questions on the research assignment sheet and or your notes from the lectures. So that's the basic way to do it. You can start to select potential avenues of direct research via the questions and via your lecture notes. So you can start to think, okay, if I want to write about feminism in Brave New World, or communism, or art and aesthetics, or the role of literature, say, those are 4 great topics for Brave New World, if a bit boring. I shouldn't say boring. Lots of people are going to do them. Mainstream. if you're going to do one of those 4 things, then you can start to quickly skim through these notes and think, okay, how many of the things I've taken down in my margins and the things that I've highlighted, how many of these things talk to each other? Because that's ultimately what you want to achieve, is an essay where the evidence talks to itself across the scope of your essay. You don't want to write, 8 paragraphs that are completely independent of each other, and you don't want to write 8 paragraphs that are saying the same thing again and again and again with different evidence. So here's where you start to work out which of your potential topics give you that balance. Is there enough for you to write on confidently? And this is where it starts to get personal. It's a personal decision to an extent. Is there enough for you to write on confidently? But also, is there enough so that you can satisfy this criteria over here? Are you going to be able to talk about enough of the breadth of the novel? All right, so this is the easy way. Now let's say if you're a bit more confident and you want to go the more challenging way, that's also potentially more fruitful in terms of achieving really high grades. Here's where you start to just use